Good morning, and I said good afternoon there. Good morning, welcome back to another We Are Sunderland morning briefing in partnership with the Farm Museum and Cospex Opticians. Good morning, Scott. How are you doing?
Morning, Matty. Yeah, I'm fine. I'm very well, thank you. Another week. We'll see what this one brings.
Yeah, as if last week, full of optimism heading to Carrow Road, and it didn't quite pan out that way, did it?
No, it didn't. And it's, I mean, we were just talking before we started this, aren't we? 9 points off the playoffs, 9 points off relegation. I mean, it just feels like a lot of things, doesn't it? It feels like deep down, the season's probably just going to drift away to nothing. Yeah. That's what it feels like. Let's be brutally honest about it. For that not to happen, the next 2 or 3 games are going to be decisive, aren't they? If Sunderland were to somehow get 7 points out the next 9, potentially they're back in it with a chance. If they were to get 1 point from the next 9, then potentially they are looking over their shoulder increasingly nervously at the other end of the table. Probably the way things have been going, the more likely scenario is they get 3, 4, 5 points out the next 9 and end up pretty much where they are now and kind of limp towards the end of the season from there. That feels the more likely scenario. But like I say, you can't rule out completely yet until the playoffs. But by the same token, I don't think you can completely rule out being dragged into it at the other end either.
Yeah. Obviously, I've done a little bit on We Are Sunderland just on the state of play at the minute. And, as Scott said there are 9 points off the playoffs, 9 points off the other end. Do I think they'll finish in there? You can head over to We Are Sunderland, give it a read. It's £1 for just 6 months worth of subscription. Obviously, we'll touch on the defeat at Norwich. We've had a column go up this morning with Richard Easterbrook from the Wise Men Say, and I think he sums it up pretty perfectly. I won't give too much away because, again, we want you to head over there and read it. But he obviously compared the two in just, the similarities heading into the game. They were all there to see, the same as last year. Sunderland needed a win, the playoff hope sort of hanging in the balance.
Yeah.
Contrasting results this time round, though, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, a contrast in just the general feel of things, isn't it? Last season, certainly from this point onwards to the end of the season, was where there was real momentum built, but also a real feel-good factor. I mean, you think back to that day at Preston and the celebrations there. And even, the first leg at home to Luton was a fantastic occasion at the stadium. Brilliant atmosphere, real optimism. Yes, we know, obviously, it didn't go to plan at Kenilworth Road, but I think everyone, I think all fans would accept there were mitigating factors behind that. And even though it was obvious that things weren't necessarily right behind the scenes with kind of some of the stuff Tony Mowbray was saying, and then obviously came out and said immediately after the Luton defeat, it still felt like there was real genuine cause for optimism, exciting young squad. The club still felt unified, all of that kind of stuff. I think the big worry at the minute is that if this season does just kind of drift away to nothing, where's the optimism for the future? Where's the sense that this is going to be, something to build on and improve on next year, and things will be better next year, and they really will be pushing for the Premier League and all of that. Even when it was going wrong towards the end of last season, that feeling, I think, was still there amongst the fan base and around the club. I'm not sure it's there at the minute. And the way things are at the moment, an interim manager with all the question marks about who might be leaving in the summer in terms of players, with all the question marks about Speakman, Kirill Louis-Dreyfus, everything that's happened in the last few months, I struggle to see how that optimism comes back between now and the end of the season, even if the team starts winning a few games.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. We'll be speaking with Mike Dodds, obviously, later today at his press conference. But even then, he's not going to come out and say, like we've touched on there, he's always going to come out and say that the playoffs are still in touch while they are mathematically possible. But realistically, are they? I mean, just the way that they've been playing at the moment, I think, like you say, it's an uphill battle to finish in that top 6. And you look, I think if we just reference the point that Michael Beale made before he left, he said that Sunderland are going to need more points than what they finished on last year. So 69 points is what they finished on last year. 70 that get them in? If Leicester, Ipswich, Leeds, and Southampton already have that with 11 games to go. So realistically, again, you've got two teams, maybe fifth and sixth in West Brom and Hull. West Brom are 11 points off 70. Hull are 14 points off 70. That is such... You're going to have to surpass that. And is that possible? I just think the run that they're on at the minute, just they'd have to win every game. They're there or thereabouts to realistically finish in that top six. And I think what they're on now, 47. So if they were to win that, every game, this is every game, they'd finish on 80 points. Now, even then, I think that the standard that's been set at the top, I just think that's so difficult that they're never going to hit that target, I don't think, particularly on this run of form.
Well, I mean, what you're talking about 11 games left. You talk about a 9-point gap at the minute, so you've got to get those 9 points just to bridge it, and that's assuming that the teams you chase and don't pick up 9 points themselves. So, listen, 11 games left. I would have said as an absolute minimum, if Sunderland are going to make the playoffs, they've got to win 8 or 9 of them. Well, that's not, realistically, they've taken no points from the last 12. So why on earth are they going to suddenly win 9 out the next 10? Now, listen, the Championship's a strange league. Form is, can fluctuate. We've seen from earlier in the season that Sunderland are capable of winning games. All of that, yeah, fine. But, living in the real world, the kind of run that Sunderland are going to need between now and the end of the season is just not going to happen. So I think what you're talking about then is, and I come back to this, what is there to play for between now and the end of the season? Well, I think there needs to be something that generates optimism or brightness or some semblance of a feel-good factor that can go into the summer and lead to a genuine belief that things are going to improve and there's something to build on for next season. Because that, like I say, yes, missing out on the playoffs would be a disappointment, but I think deep down it's probably felt that's been unlikely for most of the season. The biggest worry for me would be, where does this club go next season, the season after, whatever? Where is this club going if the season just drifts to nothing between now and the start of May? And obviously the big difficulty, and we're going over all ground a bit here, but the big difficulty is they're going to have to do it without Jack Clarke, and on the evidence of the game so far when Clarke's been out, there's nothing at the moment to suggest that Sunderland have come up with a plan of becoming a real attacking threat without Clarke in the side. That's the number one thing Dodds has to try and come up with a solution for. Looking ahead to the game this week on Tuesday night, that's got to be priority number one, and then maybe you can build something from there. But that's the first solution he's got to come up with, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, just to obviously take it back to last year, because there are going to be parallels in this sense. So if you take it back to last year where they finished inside the top 6, obviously from that squad, they've lost Ross Stewart, lost Amad Diallo. So if they don't finish in that playoff picture, which, as I've said, I probably don't think it's realistic that they will finish in there. As you say, they're going to then lose Jack Clarke. There's talk of Dan Ballard, interest in him from Premier League clubs, and there was last summer. Dan Neil also attracted Premier League interest. Now, I'm not saying all of them will go. I think it's pretty likely Jack Clarke will go, but it's replacing them. You've lost Ross Stewart. Have you replaced some other player at that level? That's what you need to do, I think. And obviously, a lot of this comes back to recruitment. Again, stuff we've touched on throughout the season. There's plenty of question marks around, right? So what happens if Jack Clarke goes? Because they brought players in. Again, I know Romain Mundle's sort of, we've talked on it. Is he a successor of Jack Clarke? I've seen bright patches from him, but he's somebody who hasn't played a lot of senior football. So the summer transfer window is going to be massive in defining next season, because I think, as you say, they've signed all these young talents and they're at a stage where, right, what's next then? Everyone's sort of accepting that Jack Clarke won't be at the club this summer. We might be surprised. He might stay, but I think that's unrealistic at this stage. I think, like you say, Scott, they need to come up with a... What's interesting is when at Beale's appointment, Christian Speakman mentioned about it doesn't matter who is in charge of the club in terms of the way that they play, style of play. So in theory, the attacking football that got fans off their seat under Tony Mowbray, that should still, in theory, be there. You should still see some sort of coherence and carrying on fluidity. there's been minor tweaks from manager to manager. But if you look at the stats from Mowbray's last game in charge, I'm not making out it was perfect because, again, there's a section of fans who weren't happy with the football under Tony Mowbray. We're just at the stage where, what are they? There's so many question marks.
Yeah. I mean, so we've had a comment in here from Jeanette Atkinson. Playoffs are well and truly gone. We now have no quality in this team. I go back to when you're talking about the team that ended last season, and you referenced the fact that they've lost Stewart, they've lost Ahmad. I don't want to go over old ground here, but I'd also throw in that they've now also lost Gooch, Bath, and Pritchard, and I don't think they've replaced them. Never mind building on, improving on what they had. I don't think they've replaced them adequately in terms of the ability in the positions that they played. But as we keep on saying, probably more importantly, in terms of leadership, experience, nous within the Championship, ability to dig in when you're in a bit of a hole, which the team's in at the minute. So there are massive, massive, massive question marks over recruitment, and in particular, the last 12 months. Now, I guess one caveat you'd say there is that if you look at some of the players that Sunderland brought in previous to that, Hume, Abdullah Ba is probably a good example. Pierre Eck was definitely another good example. It did take them 6 months, 12 months to bed in, establish themselves, and really get to grips with the Championship. So maybe we will see some improvement in some of the players who came in last summer and who thus far just haven't done it. I wouldn't like to put my mortgage on that because I think a number of them have had enough opportunities now for us to get a bit of a handle on what they can and can't do. But I guess you do have to give that caveat. But even with that, I think there are big, big, big questions now in terms of the recruitment, because I think it's hard to argue with Jeanette's view there, really, that the quality of this team is not the same as the quality of the team that ended last season. It's just not. And yes, you've lost Ahmad, you've lost Ross Stewart, etc., etc. But the whole idea of the way Sunderland are operating now is that when players go out, other ones come in to replace them, and the general quality either stays the same or improves. Well, I don't think that's happened this season, and that's where questions have to be. And that's even with accounting for the fact that, yes, at the minute they're having to play without Jack Clark, who is their best player and one of the best players in the Championship. So, arguably any club would struggle with that. But even when Clark was in the team, I don't think this team was as good as the one that finished last season.
Yeah, no, I'd agree on the latter point. I'd probably just disagree slightly and say that I still think they've got quality players, but it's outside of the starting 11, outside of what you'd consider your main starting 11. I think, like you say, the striker situation. I mean, we've had this coming through from Theodore. I mean, where would Sunderland get a striker that they can afford? It seems that the club's skint. I don't think that the club's skint. I think they've just put a lot of effort into signing these young talents in the hope that they come good. Now, obviously, there was the talk of Kiefer Moore. They didn't get him. It's where Sunderland are at, isn't it? Because they don't want to gamble. That Sunderland fans know all too well. If you put a load of money in the club and you gamble the future of the club, you'll end up in League One. That will happen. You've seen, Wigan, for example, came up, spent a lot of money. They've had financial trouble behind the scenes. If there's only there's only 3 teams go up, and obviously if you've got the likes of Ipswich, for example, don't go up. They've put a lot of money into it. I know Hull are spending a lot of money. If Southampton miss out, they've got the parachute payments. But again, it's, as I say, it's just there's so many questions, and I think where does Sunderland get a striker from? It's tough to answer at this stage, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I would say on that is Sunderland are not the only Championship club that have struggled to sign a striker in the last 12, 18 months. We've seen it down the road with Borough. They cannot get a striker through the door. There are a number of other clubs as well who are trying to get that striker who makes a difference. So it's not easy. In answer to Theodore, I mean, I think there's 3 kind of areas that Sunderland can go down to get a striker. One is that you pay the money to get an established striker who's tried and tested in the Championship and will score goals, i.e. Kiefer Moore, who, the talk in January, he's gone to Ipswich, he's scored in pretty much every game, but Ipswich are having to pay an absolute fortune to have him between now and the end of the season. And if you're trying to sign a striker like that permanently, then it pretty much eats up all of Sunderland's budget and probably takes their wage ceiling above a level where they want it to be. So that's an option, but it's financially very, very difficult. Premier League loan is clearly the other option, and that's been a fruitful ground for Sunderland and a number of other Championship clubs in the past. I think the problem, certainly in January, was that for a whole host of reasons, which I know we've touched on previous vids, Premier League clubs didn't really want to let their younger players go out on loan, partly because they had their own players away at Africa or Asia, partly because they had a lot of injuries, partly because FFP means they need to hold on to these younger players. There's a lot of different reasons, but a market there that's, traditionally been one that's been really fruitful for Championship clubs. I mean, you look at the leading sides in the Championship this year, there's very, very few of them have a Premier League loan striker leading the line, whereas in previous seasons, there's been a lot more of that. So where do you go for option 3? You go abroad, and that's what Sunderland have been doing. But as we've seen from the last transfer window, you're always taking a bit of a punt. You're bringing in players who you can't know for sure whether they're going to settle or not and how long it's going to take them to settle. They're not necessarily going to be ideally suited to the style of play in the Championship. So it is a gamble. It is a risk. And so, I think they're the 3 main options Sunderland have. But there are risks or problems attached with all 3 of them. Hence why they've struggled in the last 12 or 18 months to get the striker they want. But like I say, I do give them a degree of a pass in that because they're not the only Championship side in that position.
Yeah, I mean, you touch on it as well. Look, Coventry have lost a couple of games on the bounce. Borough, and Sunderland, they're 3 of the clubs that finished inside the playoffs last year. And again, I think it just shows the strength of the Championship, particularly this year. I do think it's a stronger division than it was last year. But at the same time, it's frustrating. That's the frustrating part, because on the day, Sunderland can match anyone. And we saw in the, the defeat, albeit, look, it was a defeat. Sunderland played really well at Leicester. Now, interesting comment from Joe Flatman through here. He says, I could see a big rebuild in the summer with Clark, Neil, Patterson and Ballard all heading out the door. I disagree. I don't necessarily think that there'll be a massive overhaul. I think the amount of youngsters that we saw come in during the summer, you'd think that would be the extent. They are the players that they want to build around for the future, which then might lead into a positive summer. This is me just with my positive hat on here and thinking that they might take a more considered approach to bringing experience. For example, if you do get money from Clark, then that frees up, more money to reinvest and bring in those players who do have the experience and do have the nous to sort of get you finishing higher up the table.
Yeah, I mean, I struggle to see a scenario where all 4 of them leave. Yeah. I think as we've said, for a number of months now, all the mood music points to the fact that Clark will be very hard to hold on to, I think, this summer, as long as the interest that we're understood to, led to believe that there is from Premiership clubs or clubs at the top end of the Championship hoping to be Premier League clubs next summer materialises. I mean, a big rebuild and interest. Numerically, I don't think Sunderland need a whole host of players, even if a few leave, because, they're not struggling to fill a bench. They've got enough players. Yeah, it's the quality that you need to add. And that's the big issue, I think, for Sunderland in the summer. And yes, you sell Jack Clark, you get a load of money in, that's fine. But, let's say Sunderland sell Clark and have, I don't know, £10 million to spend on a player or a couple of players. Well, A, how do you attract a £10 million player to Sunderland if you finish in the bottom half of the Championship this season? Yep. And B, if you're buying a striker for £8-10 million, well, you're probably going to have to pay them double what you're currently paying anyone else, because they're going to command that kind of wage level. So you've got to completely rip up all of your current wage model and your wage ceilings to do that. So, this idea that you sell Jack Clark and suddenly you've got a massive pot of money and you can just outspend every other club in the division, it's not going to be as easy as that for Sunderland. It really isn't, because, with the greatest will in the world, if you're trying to sign a 10, 12, 40 million pound striker, you're not going to be the only club looking to sign that striker this summer, almost certainly. And like I say, you're going to have to, raise your wage level significantly to be able to get them ahead of, say, a club that's coming down with parachute payments, or, a Premier League club who's looking in the same market, or a club in France or Germany or whatever.
Well, you look just at the Ross Stewart situation where the club weren't willing to sort of offer a deal that broke their current wage structure. So it's, they are pretty...
And has been an issue clearly with Clark and his contract talks that, it certainly seems like the club doesn't want to go to the kind of levels that Clark's representatives think he should be getting, given that he's potentially going to be a Premier League player next season.
Yeah. Talk with Pritchard as well, that there was speculation that he was offered a deal on the same wages. So again, it's interesting. I think, obviously, we'll speak with Mike Dodds later this afternoon. Just to move on to Leicester. Now, interestingly, they were also in a bit of a sticky patch, having lost, 4 games in their previous however many, and they've lost 3 now in the last 5. And they're coming up here not in a great deal of form. If we look at who they've been beaten to, they've been beaten off QPR, beaten off Leeds, beaten off Borough. There is, at the same time, an opportunity there for Sunderland if, and it's a big if, that they can sort of snap back to what we used to seeing.
Yeah, and again, it's clutching at straws here, but it feels a little bit like a game that might actually suit Sunderland. This Leicester coming desperately needing to win. It's a massive game for Leicester. The form that Leeds, Ipswich, and Southampton are on, snapping at their heels. Leeds and Ipswich in particular, they cannot afford to lose another game, having, like you said, lost at home to Borough, lost at home to QPR. They desperately need a result. Sunderland have generally performed pretty well against the bigger teams in this league. I sometimes think it suits them reasonably well to let the other team have a bit more possession, sit back and look to break. Admittedly, probably better with that when Clark's in the team, but still, there's a lot of pace in that Sunderland team. There are players who can, transition really quickly and cause a threat on the counter-attack. You look at Bart, you look at Mundell if he's playing, potentially Hamir if he gets another shout up front. And, it will be a cracking kind of midweek atmosphere, big game under the lights at the stadium, light, etc., etc. So I'll be disappointed if Sunderland didn't at least raise their performance levels from what we've seen in the last 2 or 3 games fairly markedly. Now, whether that's good enough or not, that's still a question, because Leicester, on their best form, I think probably still beat Sunderland no matter how well Sunderland play. But Leicester haven't been on their best form, as you rightly say, for the last month or so. They're definitely in their worst run of the whole season. And they're going into the game knowing that they really need to win it. So, I definitely don't think it's a foregone conclusion, this. But I still think a number of things are probably going to have to fall right for Sunderland for them to be able to get the result.
I'm interested just to see what you think in terms of the current makeup of the starting 11 at the moment. Now, there's a lot of talk about, particularly online, about Job's performances and whether he would benefit from a spell out of the side. Now, obviously, just having watched the Norwich game, I don't think necessarily that the midfield was a specific area. But I think what Tony Mowbray did really well was manage the game time of those players. So the likes of Job, bring them into the squad, take them out of the squad. What do you make of that current sort of midfield 3? Because Neil, Ekwa and Job have all played an awful lot of football.
Yeah, I think in an ideal world, Job would have had a rest before now. I think he would have had a period out with the team before now. I think, and I feel like I'm repeating myself endlessly here. I think without Clark, it becomes harder to then leave Job out, because I think, on his day, he is your next best creative, technical kind of midfield option behind Clark, isn't he? He's the one who on his day is probably going to unlock a Leicester defence. He's going to get in the box. He's going to be a threat. He's going to link up with the players around him, all of that kind of stuff. So I think it becomes harder to leave him out when Clark's not there, and Robert's not there as well, obviously, which we forget about a bit. So, yeah, in an ideal world, he would have been rested before now. I think we're probably at the stage now where, because the options in that attacking third have been reduced so much, I think you've probably got to carry on playing him. I think the same's probably true of Neil and Ekwa. I guess Styles could play there, but seems a wider option at the moment. But could play in a more central role. I think tomorrow against Leicester, you've got to play your best team. You've got to keep those three together. I don't think individually any of them are playing at their best at the minute.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is because they've probably just been running the ground a little bit. But to a certain extent, I think we are where we are now. So I think you've still got to play them.
I think, like you say, I think particularly heading into Leicester, Southampton, see where you are then. Obviously, you don't want to be looking over your shoulder and thinking, oh, heck, we're going to end up in a relegation battle here. But I do think there's time for experimentation now between now and the end of the season. Again, you don't want to get drawn into that battle at the bottom. But with a couple of wins, you'd obviously say that Sunderland will be safe. But at the same time, like you say, when you're coming up against your Leicesters, Southamptons, they're not really the games to be experimenting in. And I do think, like you say, the need to come in. I just think they owe the supporters a bit of a performance and just a timely reminder that, look, they have got quality. We know what they can do on the day, but we haven't seen that day in quite a while.
Yeah. No, yeah, I agree. They've lost 4 on the spin. If you suddenly lose to Leicester and Southampton and that becomes 6 defeats on the spin, then that's a horrendous run of form. Before you start really thinking about, like you say, winding the season down or giving kids a chance or doing this and the other, you need to stop that rot. You need to win. You need to win a game of football. You need to turn this around. So I think that at the minute remains the absolute only priority. And so for me, those three have to play. I mean, who plays? I guess Riggs is the interesting one. Yeah. He hasn't had a chance this year. He could go in there. And I think definitely between now and the end of the season, Riggs deserves the opportunity to have a bit of an opportunity in there and have a couple of games. Like I say, and you were saying, Leicester at home off the back of 4 successive defeats doesn't feel like the kind of game where you do that. But I think he will get a shot between now and the end of the season because, he's not really had the chance to show himself this year and he probably deserves a bit of a run.
Yeah, I think he scored against Southampton earlier in the year, didn't he? So it's one of those. I think he's played off the right when he did it at Norwich and he did it, I think it was either Plymouth or Swansea. I think it was a Swansea game, came off the right. But that's it. You're then thinking, oh, are we going to hold on to him? So there's plenty to talk about, and we'll be back with you on Wednesday. We've been We Are Sunderland in partnership with the Farm Museum and Cospex Opticians. If you head over to We Are Sunderland, you can subscribe, get 6 months of content for just £1. Thanks for joining me, Scott.
No problem. Enjoy the game, everyone. I will see you there, Matty, tomorrow night.
You will. Catch you there, mate.